Warning, the podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Umi Southworth, Part 4.
There are people that are listening to you all today that I know for a fact have had family members go missing or that are struggling with unsolved cases. I know they're in our audience. And it emphasizes the importance of how you have to be brutally honest with the investigators about that family member, and you can't hold a single thing back. And I know that's difficult for people because sometimes they have a loved one that lives a high-risk lifestyle and they try to hide that. But I've always tried to tell them that if you try to hide that, you're going to slow the case down because none of this works without that kind of honesty. Mm-hmm. So this is a good time to point out to somebody if you're struggling with that to make sure that you're completely honest about everything about that person that you can figure out, because it's going to really help in the end with that case probably.
Mm-hmm. And luckily, Donald's second wife was very honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to provide some timeline of where we're at so far is in reviewing all the evidence so the audience can kind of keep up, is that in reviewing the cell phone, like Dave had mentioned, in reviewing other evidence, which would be talking to UPS, we were able to create some type of timeline to the night of the homicide. So just so the audience is aware where we're at, is that Umi's last text was at 1:42 a.m. Donald, and I'm going to let Schoon talk more about this because this is very important, but Donald's call, he ends up calling UPS at 3:18, or I'm sorry, UPS calls Donald at 3:18 a.m. He was supposed to report to work at 3:15 a.m. that morning. At 3:19 a.m., Donald calls UPS, and then at 3:20, UPS returns Donald's call because no one answered. And then at 3:30 a.m., Donald calls UPS back, actually speaks to an individual and says, I have to come to work. Do not fill my spot, because Donald drove a truck, a delivery truck, and if he did not show up on time, they would fill his spot with another individual. And Donald clocks in at 3:36 when he was supposed to be at work at 3:15. Do you want to speak on that?
Did he give any justification as to why he was some 15 minutes late to work?
No, he just said, I need to come to work. In fact, the individual at UPS that we interviewed said, this is the first time I've ever had an employee call me demanding to come to work.
And so we actually pulled 30 days of records of him clocking in, and everything was within like 2 minutes, because it's so set. I mean, you show up at 2:58 to 3:02 and you get in your truck and you go. And every day right on time, except that one day at 15, 20 minutes late.
Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to make sure the audience was clear on our timeline, because I don't think we ever went into that as far as where we're at with the victim and the last time she was seen alive and when Donald had went to work.
Now, did you all ask him during this interview why he was late to work, or did he not know that you knew?
We did not know that he was late to work at the point of our interview because it was that first night. We did ask about her cell phone and who she was texting. And so you have to remember, now we have to do a warrant for Umi Southworth's cell phone. So that's going to take some time because cell phone companies don't say, okay, we'll send it to you tomorrow. That's going to take another 30 days. So we have to wait for that telephone information. Now, another tool resource we have in our bag is the immediate phone. We can what's called Cellbrite. And what that is a photographic image of what's on that cell phone. We can get that information that night if we know her passcode and everything into the phone. But again, it was 2 days after that we found the purse, or a day after we found the purse. And then we have to write the search warrant. We do Cellbrite it, but we still need all the contents of the texts, the past texts, and who she's contacted and what time, which is very important because we have that timeline, like Bill said. We want to narrow it down to a short window and who could have had or who could have encountered Umi outside at 1:42 p.m. or after 1:42 p.m. So that was our goal, is to minimize that timeline.
So to follow up with what Dave had said originally with on the second wife was her honesty. So as I mentioned, talking about the GAQs, the General Assessment Questionnaire, I remember this day very vividly as well, is that...
I do too. I think you laid your head on my shoulder and screamed.
Yeah. So the FBI had requested that we send these GAQs out to everyone that knew the family, that anyone that had any connection to them, anyone that had any communication to them, to see if any information could be provided that we had not received. So I sent these GAQs out to a number of people, specifically to the other wife as well. And her GAQ came back. And you have to understand the amount of documents that we're having to process here. I mean, there's only 3 of us. I mean, it was really just the 3 of us, right, that was reviewing all this evidence, plus working our other cases. So we're trying to go through it as quickly as we can. Well, I remember this day, and I'd already been beat down by the FBI anyway. And I remember getting a phone call from the lead BAU agent asking me if I had read the response of the living wife's GAQ. And I said, I had not yet. What are you seeing? And she said, you haven't read that yet? And I said, no. And so, again, I'm sitting here listening to her, and she tells me, well, you need to read it. So I pull it out. And the question on the GAQ, and again, like we spoke about earlier, there's some pressing questions. But the question specifically, which was question 61, said, does he or she engage in risky sexual behavior? And the wife's response was yes. He had, or the response was protected sex and multiple partners, forced a stolen used condom with semen from someone else inside my vagina. That was her answer to that question. As we all know, there's foreign DNA in Umi's vagina. Now we have his living wife responding that he's placed used condoms with foreign DNA in her vagina. Obviously, we still may have the right guy. So I remember being disappointed in myself as a detective because I hadn't gotten to that information yet, and had, again, the FBI pointed out to me. In fact, that's brought up several times later on in a
joking fashion.
Yeah. And so
it's only joking so that you don't feel so bad about yourself.
Yeah, because if it keeps up, I'm going to do a GoFundMe for support service animal. Or you can leave with one of our mini miniature horses out in the back paddock,
which is illegal ADA.
So I remember hanging at the phone again, looking at Dave across from me, and telling him and Schoon we need to go to James's office. And I remember leaning against the wall, as I always do, looking at James, looking at Schoon, looking at Dave, and telling them what I just was basically told was located in this GAQ. And of course, we all again gasped with surprise. We didn't know what to say about this. But then it was like, okay, here we go. We're back on track. This is circled around for us. Here we go. But we also were like, well, how are we going to prove this?
Well, I do have to ask, did Donald know of the foreign semen that was in Umi's vagina, or had you all not told him about that?
So we didn't know it until this day, nor did he know that we had known this, and that'll come in the end. We don't need to go into that right now.
But of course, we have a tech wizard in our little threesome that is handling this case. So we assigned Dave a great job. Dave, would you like to tell us what kind of job?
I'm ashamed to say the things I've searched on the internet, but I was curious, how do you find this kind of stuff? I mean, and so unfortunately I Googled it, and you can order them online.
Order what? Order what?
Order a used condom online. The funny thing is, I was at a fast food restaurant the next day. I saw one there. It's like, so if you're not, it's the thing about police work is if you're looking for a stolen car and you're looking for a Chevy Malibu, you will see 100 Chevy Malibus in that day. And so I'd never really looked for condoms on the ground. And then sure enough, I see one in a parking lot. I go to a park. I find 2 or 3 in the park. And I'm like, well, apparently it's not that hard to find a used condom. And so that added a whole nother angle to this, like whose DNA is in that still?
And of course, our sense of humor, when he comes back to the office and says, I saw a used condom in the park. I've seen it in a parking lot. We're looking for evidence envelopes with tape on it. He never collected them. So is he really qualified to be in the unit? So that's what we were asking ourselves at this point, hoping that he could help us solve this case. No.
Yeah, I'm done.
I've got something for you.
No, I'm done.
Now it's October 2010. And so some time has passed, and what we've decided to do, and at the request of the FBI, is they have actually asked us back to discuss the information we had obtained since the last time we met, which was in August. So 2 months have passed. Specifically about the information that we were just speaking about with the GAQ, with the living wife, with the information she provided with the used condom being placed in her vagina by Donald. So Schoon and I and James traveled to Quantico, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yes.
And to meet with the BAU unit again to discuss where we were at with this case. So during that time, we meet with them. I feel I'm a little bit more prepared this time. I'm not going to cry.
Right.
And you're not going to have to hold me.
No. I had to rub your back for a little bit there.
So we travel there, and we end up meeting with the BAU unit again. And what they have done at this time, since 2 months have passed, they have put together basically a packet of information describing what they think has happened.
Their evaluation
Correct.
of their victimology, and the evaluation of the crime scene and the type of suspect that would commit this crime.
Right. And they refer to those things, just as Schoon had said, as a victimology, a crime analysis, and then a final assessment. Again, I hate to refer to television, but just to give you some idea of how this is working, it's just like you see on Criminal Minds, where they all sit down and they talk about it and who has done this and who may be doing this. So in the victimology, they talk about Umi, how at risk she was. They ranked her as a low risk victim. Her relationship with Donald, was she a targeted victim and not? It wasn't a random act. They had talked to us about the motive. Talked about how she was killed by blunt force trauma. Also talked about, we have her nude at the scene. It appears to be a sexual assault. It appears to be a murder, but there was no trauma to the vaginal area. There was some semen located in her vagina. There was no ransacking of the residence. There was nothing stolen from her purse. There was nothing stolen from the residence. And then this is where it really gets to be important in the case. There was evidence of what we were calling staging.
Right. Which is, so in reality, all the courtroom drama television shows that you see, that's not really how it works. There's several hearings throughout the process, from getting someone arrested by the grand jury to the preliminary hearing to the grand jury to the trial. And what happens is they determine what can be said in a courtroom and what cannot be said in the courtroom when a jury is present. So they minimize, or I shouldn't say minimize, I stand corrected. They determine what can be said, and they sterilize what the testimony should be from certain witnesses. And then what Bill said was staging. They made a motion that the term staging could not be used. And the Commonwealth agreed, okay, so we won't use staging. So Bill, in his creative testimony, came up with another term. And we'll decide that, we'll explain that later.
Mm-hmm. So to follow up with that, in the analysis provided by the BAU unit, we talked more about the crime scene being staged. And when I say that to explain further to the audience, is Schoon had kind of hit on it as well, is if this victim, Umi, was sexually assaulted, there would be more trauma to the vaginal area if she was sexually assaulted. The items, her clothing, would not be just kind of placed next to her. You would seem to think they would be torn where she's resisting from being sexually assaulted. So these are all things that were being pointed out to us by the BAU unit.
And to describe what they said, it's a great quote. I wish we could say we came up with this, but the person committing the crime only knows what a crime is based on what they see on TV if they're not true criminal, right? So if a person is a serial rapist, who's going to take the time to take off the clothes of their victim and then throw them over the fence? Usually you'll see that the clothing ripped, right? Or pulled halfway up and left on the victim. This is not the case. It was thrown over the fence and just laid there. So the limitations of the person committing that crime is based on what they think.
Basically, the offender's imagination.
Yeah.
And to go along with that is, these are all things we had discussed, Dave, myself, James, and Schoon. But of course, the FBI was also just saying, this is what we're seeing. And it kind of went along with everything we were thinking, but it went a little further because this is what they do. So they were talking about the inconsistencies that they were seeing, the staging they were seeing was like, if this was a true assault, a true rape, a true murder, then why did they not go in and sexually assault or even murder the child that was inside the residence? Why were these items not taken? Why is the purse being stashed in the bushes? So these were all just things that were being brought to our attention, which we had discussed. But then we also were talking about the staging as far as Donald's presence there at the scene at the time of the homicide and how he stated he'd went to work. We knew that he had been late for work and how he demanded to go to work. So these were all things that came into play during our time with the FBI. So to finish up our meeting with the FBI, they decided to tell us, look, you need to go back to Donald and try to interview him if you can. And if so, you need to have some type of strategy and work towards his ego, work towards empathizing with his feelings, and being very receptive with his relationship with his daughter or with his two wives.
So is that what you did?
So after we met with the FBI, we had not done that yet. So what we decided to do was just review the facts and evaluate the scene. So when we went through that, we came up with a number of things such as, why was the purse and the belongings still on scene? Why were the clothes not torn? Why was the plastic bag in the same location of the purse? Why was there no forced entry? Why was there no injuries? Why was the belt loosely placed around her neck? Why were the shoes in the yard? Why were the keys in the yard? Why was there
no forced entry?
No forced entry.
And they got into Donald's background and trying to go back and research even prior to this event, everything that occurred. And I think we spent a lot of time trying to backtrack for the 10 years prior to that. And that led us on a whole nother avenue of more people to interview. And so it's only October and we don't rest for several more months because we just keeps digging into these things and there's more and more people to interview.
Yeah. So to pick up what Dave is explaining, I think just to give you some timeline again. So that was October, was our second meeting with FBI. We don't actually have enough to go to the grand jury to testify until June of next year. So in that time, we're working this case, but as Dave said, we're now trying to link up with other witnesses and other people that were involved with Donald. And what we come to find out was he had several relationships with several different women who actually were in hiding because of their physical and mental relationship with Donald. So it was our job to try to locate these witnesses and try to interview them and find out the background of their relationship with Donald. And in doing so, it was very difficult because these women had been in hiding since the time they were dating Donald. No other times was he married, but he had dated and lived with these women. We were able to find out their names. Some of them were under an alias, but we were able to use some of our capabilities as law enforcement to locate them. One specific, which is a young lady that he was with early on prior to these other two women, who had actually staged her own kidnapping to get away from Donald because that's how fearful she was that he was going to kill her. This young lady was in hiding. I was able to locate her family and was speaking to them by phone numerous times during the week, documenting every time that I spoke to them. They were also sharing with me the times that they spoke to her and also telling me that she didn't wish to be spoke to or even located. So in using that information, we were able to locate and identify her based on phone records of where she may be. So when that was discovered, the Commonwealth, Schoon, and I and Dave decided it was a very important time to go talk with her to see if we could get some background about their relationship and his mental and physical abuse if that took place. So after we were able to obtain the information from the phone company, we actually established which state she was in, and myself and another Commonwealth attorney, assistant Commonwealth attorney, traveled to this location and did surveillance, trying to locate her. And in doing so, we were able to locate her and follow her to a residence. And this is a complete story, part of the story that's almost unbelievable, to be honest with you. And what I mean by that is once we discovered her and located her and surveilled her, we followed her to a residence. And once I made first contact with her and explained to her who I was, she dropped to her knees, began vomiting, and telling me or asking me not to kill her. And when I asked her what she meant by that, she told me that she knew that Donald had sent me to her to kill her. And I said, I'm the police. I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to talk to you. And she said to me, as she's looking up at me, wiping the vomit from her face and crying hysterically, that she said Donald had told her if she ever left and she was ever found, he would send the police to kill her. It took some time for myself, or for me and the assistant Commonwealth attorney, to convince her that we were not there to harm her. We were actually there just to help her and interview her. So after she stands up, she jumps in her car, locks the doors, and calls the police, and the police respond to the residence. And I have to identify myself with credentials and explain what the story is. And eventually she comes out of the car, and we sit on her back patio and talk for hours on end about her relationship with Dawn Southworth.
What did you learn from that interview with her on that back porch?
So the interview between myself and the assistant Commonwealth attorney and her, we discovered that Donald was exactly who we thought he was, which was an individual that thought he was smarter than anyone else, would threaten everyone else, and come to find out that he basically made these women believe that if they had ever left him, he was going to have them killed, whether by him or by someone else, and even by the police. So that interview went on for a while, and from that information, we were actually able to identify another young lady who had been in hiding. That was his second relationship. And so what we took from that was we were going to go back to Lexington. We were going to have another meeting about this, and then we were going to try to locate this second lady that had been in a relationship with Donald, and she was also in hiding. And Schoon and I and Dave did a lot of research trying to locate her, and we eventually did. And so myself and that same assistant Commonwealth attorney traveled to that location in hiding. It was basically a farm out in nowhere of a state that was not close to here. And Schoon, I apologize.
No, that's all right.
That was with us. So we get to that location and we interview her, and she thought we were there to kill her as well.
So he really had these women believing that if they ever broke from his clinches, he'd get them if he found them again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They were scared. They wouldn't believe that we were the police, even after showing credentials.
Right.
So how did you convince her? Did you call in other law enforcement from that local area as well? Or did she just eventually believe you and talk, or would she just not talk?
Normally when we interview people as witnesses, we don't let anyone else sit in because we wanted a pure interview. At that point, we allowed family members to sit beside them or at the same table with us and allowed them to be comfortable with us. And we gave them our cards and let them call the police department and confirm who we were. And that way they would sit down and talk to us.
So the second person, she eventually did talk as well.
Yes.
She did. So
did she reveal much of the same thing that the first lady did?
Exactly the same thing. She would both, I want you to understand, we're also in fear that once we left that we were going to reveal in discovery their locations. And so we actually had to go through hearings to where we were not providing their actual locations to Donald in discovery, so then they were still safe and having to present that information to the judge. So once we learned all this information, we then traveled back to the office. And as Dave mentioned earlier, we traveled all across the United States on this case. During this time, we also interviewed the daughters again. We had the FBI interview the daughters as well, trying to obtain any information. We kept meeting with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in this case, which the lead Commonwealth Attorney was Ray Larson at the time, and the assistant was Luana Raycorn, who's now the Commonwealth Attorney. And we kept having meetings and more meetings to get this case strong, because we all knew who was guilty of this. It was just we had to prove it. We still hadn't figured out whose DNA it was.
Right. The big hurdle that we could not get over before we went to the grand jury was the foreign DNA. How do you explain that in a trial in front of a jury?
Yeah, because that sounds like that thing called reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And reasonable doubt is not absolute reasonable doubt, as everybody would think. In a trial, it's a reasonable doubt of the common person, right? So that was a huge hurdle that we had to get over. That and the fact, and during the trial, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but during the trial, we had to get over that the police let Umi lay out there. And how are we going to explain that to the jury and get them to see what the police see?
Yeah, because I remember when that happened. And the thing is that all of us have been there, either because of a car wreck or anything. And when you've been at this job at any time, you find people that are deceased or close to it. But when you have that much injury, that's an assumption we'd all make. And I remember, too, that was kind of a policy adjustment that you alluded to on the first episode, is that prior to that, there wasn't any really requirement for anybody to come like the emergency care people and put pads on them to look for a heart thing, because I think for years we kept going by that thing that we can't tamper with a scene. And I remember it was drilled into me in 1992 that, those damn firemen are going to come and they're going to leave gauze and wrappers and they're going to destroy your crime scene. And when I finally got to homicide, I would say, I think I can explain on the stand that, yes, they left those things because they were trying to save somebody's life. That's not the same thing as tampering. So I think when that came about, is we had a good policy shift at that point to protect everybody.
But that's what that officer was doing, that lifted up that mattress. He had seen death because of the things he had seen. And so, yes, we did change the policy, but there was a logical explanation of why he just froze that scene. Because just like you said, he didn't want to disturb that scene anymore because he wanted to catch the bad guy.
Yeah, and she was injured that bad. And for people that fortunately don't deal with this, we've all seen people's bodies in incredibly bad shape. And that there's a certain point where life just isn't even a functional possibility. So, yeah, there was an honest human thing right there to make that assumption. I'd have done it too.
And just so the audience knows, just so they can have some ease about this, is that the ME testifies to this at the end in the trial that she would not have survived that injury anyway. So if she had been transported the minute she was discovered, that she was found to be alive, she still would not have lived through that. So
you mentioned you found the two former relationship people with Donald. Did you ever find a third that you interviewed, or did you stop with the two?
Well, of course, we actually went back and interviewed the second wife probably 3 more times after we discovered what she did with the questionnaire. And a lot more came forward about the pattern of behavior, which was similar with the other ones. So, what they did ask us to do is to gather information for Donald Southworth's trips overseas. Maybe that would reveal some information that we could, have as bringing wives back, or maybe getting married over there and bringing women back here. But we didn't discover that. We did what they asked, what the behavior science unit asked, and there was no telltale sign of any other women other than what we discovered there.
Now, the first 2 ladies that you all interviewed that were in hiding, did he bring them here, or were they met here? And you mentioned another country. Where was this?
Yeah, so the one wife Umi had been brought back from Indonesia. That's where he had met her. But the other two, the first two that we had spoke to, the first one had some ties to Indonesia, but the second one did not. But they all seem to have had the same background, individuals that may be believed to be here illegally, and because he would always threaten them with calling immigration. So he would try to control them by that as well, whether they thought they were legally here or not. So we realized that he was basically staying with the same set of women throughout his relationships with all these women. So when we interviewed the one wife that was still alive numerous times, like Schoon said, we were obtaining more information. But I think also what I need to add to that was she was also providing information that led us to possibilities of why or where he may have collected or obtained this foreign DNA. And what I mean by that is they were friends with certain individuals here in Lexington. And during that time, it was explained to us that Donald was actually providing marital counseling to a couple. And so they were constantly traveling back and forth between houses here in Lexington. And it was our understanding from the one living wife that he had mentioned during that time of sexual intercourse when he inserted the used condom into her vagina, that it's okay, it's clean, it's from our friends that we know, and it's safe. So she believed and told Schoon and I that it may have came from this couple that he was counseling. Well, by the time we tracked them down, they were actually residing in Asia. So I won't forget that phone call. I actually was able to track him down and called him over the phone, this couple. And I called him like at 5 a.m. or whatever it was. And I remember making contact with him because the FBI had actually assisted me in tracking him down and getting the phone number. And I interviewed him over the phone. And during that interview, it opened up with, I could hear some roosters crowing in the background and him asking what this was about. And I explained to him that we were investigating Donald and asked what his relationship was with him. And he had told me exactly what we knew, which was he was counseling them for marital issues, him and his wife. And I'd asked him if he was ever inside their residence. He said, yes, he would come to our residence to provide the counseling. And I said, well, do you and your wife have sex? And if so, do you use protection? And he said, actually, at that time, during the time Donald was counseling us, we were using condoms because we didn't want to have a child at that time. And I asked how he disposed of those condoms, and he stated that he disposed of them in the garbage. So it almost went in sync with what the one wife was telling us, that during the time that he inserted the used condom, saying it was for close friends of ours, it's a clean condom with clean semen, that it may have came from this couple. And he had access to the used condom, which was in the trash. So we thought that could be a way of explaining why we're seeing that. So what I had asked is if the FBI can meet with him to swab him to compare his DNA to the used DNA, or to the DNA that was found in Umi's vagina. And he agreed to that. But he also stated that it was very easy for people to hire people to kill people over there, especially witnesses. So after I hung up the phone with him, that was the last I ever heard from him. The FBI was never able to locate him, to swab him for the DNA to be compared to this DNA that was located in Umi.
Well, then it lends you to wonder if Donald didn't have he and his wife convinced to be in fear of him, like the ladies that were in hiding.
That's correct.
Seems like everybody was afraid of Donald.
Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't think that when you look at him. He's 5'10", thin. He's not very threatening.
No.
But certainly psychologically, you've developed a profile of a literal monster.
Mm-hmm. So at that point, we think we have some explanation of maybe how this used or the DNA,
foreign DNA
is inside of her. So we approached the Commonwealth. we're now looking at June of 2011. We're a year out from the original date of the homicide.
Almost exactly the day.
Yeah. And it's decided that we're going to go. This is about as good as it gets at this point, right? That's where we're at.
Let's present it to the grand jury and lay out all these facts that we've just done in these last couple hours and let them make a determination.
Hey, you know there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.